Boys, I have a few questions for you. Do you have a strange feeling of boredom and listlessness in your otherwise fulfilling life? Have you tried to find yourself on exotic holidays without success? Do you often find yourself feeling unreasonably touchy, irritable, moody, melancholic, depressed, or insecure? Have you tried modern pharmaceutical treatments and been disappointed with the results? You might be experiencing an anima mood, and today is your lucky day because we are going to be discussing the anima in depth, what it is, how it manifests, and how you can benefit from understanding it. The power of names is potent indeed. To name something is to understand it, and to understand it is to control it. Before we launch into this, I want to say that I have an existing video on the personal and collective unconscious, dubbed The Shadow, by Carl Jung. I would recommend viewing that prior to this, as it provides important meaning and context to the importance of the unconscious. The anima and animu are complementary psychological archetypes. These aspects are contrasexual. For men, it is the feminine anima, and for women, it is the masculine animu. Not to be confused with anime, which is Japanese cartoons. I use the word feminine a lot here, and honestly, I don't like it. It doesn't fit very well. The word feminine is difficult to separate from the idea of feminine sexuality, although to confuse the aforementioned feminine aspects of mood, perception to beauty, etc., with that of feminine sexual tendency is a fatal mistake. In fact, Jung considered homosexuality and gender dysphoria a major malfunction of the anima, even describing it as an anima possession. But there isn't any other word suitable to encompass these psychological aspects. The simple fact is that both men and women have contrasexual psychological tendencies that influence our emotions, moods, and decisions. The anima is the personification of all feminine psychological aspects of the man's psyche, including both negative and positive components. These can include vague feelings and moods, prophetic hunches, receptiveness to the irrational, capacity for personal love, perception of beauty, feeling for nature and animals, and most importantly, man's relation to his unconscious. Conversely, women possess the rational and assertive animus, which complements their feminine ego. In this dichotomy, the logical, rational mind is considered to be the masculine, and the emotional and creative side is considered to be the feminine. We should take a quick detour to describe the 4 Jungian archetypes to prevent confusion. These 4 archetypes consist of the persona, the ego, the shadow, and the anima, or animus. If you've already watched my other video on the concept of the shadow, which is the personal unconscious, you may notice some crossover between the shadow and the anima. Archetypes can be considered as the components of our collective psyche, and cannot be further broken down into smaller principles. The 4 archetypes should be considered as layers in an ocean, with the surface being most conscious and the depths being least conscious. On the surface is the persona, the conscious personality that we display towards others. Then comes the ego, then the personal unconscious, and finally, the anima or animus. As I shall explain, the anima performs a mediating role between the conscious and the unconscious parts of the mind. The anima and animus exist both in the individual unconsciousness and the collective or inherited unconsciousness of our species, forming a link between the personal and impersonal. The anima or animus provides a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious aspects of our psyche. As I described in my last video, the unconscious holds the keys to one's destiny, to self-development and self-individuation. In this way, it is important. Successful engagement with the anima, and by extension the unconscious, provides the path to relieving the aforementioned neurotic symptoms of melancholy, irritability, depression, etc. that manifest from these so-called anima moods. The unconscious has long had an important role as a spiritual source, from the most primitive bush religions to the highly developed modern religions of Christianity, Buddhism, etc. To start, let's take a look at some of the more peculiar practices of primitive peoples. The anima has a special reverence in the eyes of the Eskimo and other Arctic tribes. These people view their anima as a connection and guide to the spiritual unconscious ghost land, as they describe it. Like some of the primitive tribes of Africa and South America, who dress up as the spirit entities they wish to embody, some Eskimo tribes go as far as wearing women's clothes or even painting breasts on their garments in order to manifest their anima. It's much easier to observe the anima in its negative manifestation than its positive manifestation. I expect you'll have a light bulb moment of revelation about your own anima here, so we shall start by describing the nature and dangers of a negative anima. As a general rule, The manifestation of a man's anima is shaped by his mother. This is how the concept of mummy issues, or a mother complex, can influence a man's character. If a man feels his mother had a negative influence on him, his anima will often express itself in irritable moods, depression, uncertainty, insecurity, and touchiness. Within a man with such an anima, he will often hear this theme: I am nothing. Nothing makes any sense. With others, it's different, but for me, I enjoy nothing. These anima moods are responsible for a sort of dullness and a fear of disease, accidents, misfortune, and unavoidable failure. The man's entire life can take on a sad and oppressive aspect. These dark moods can also lure a man to suicide, in which case the anima becomes a type of death demon. Similarly, unrealized indulgence of the feminine anima can cause what Jung described as an anima possession, leading to gender dysphoria, autogynephilia, or even forms of self-castration, which have similarities to the modern concept of gender transitioning. This negative anima figure is represented in culture and mythology the world over. The French describe it as the femme fatale. The Greek sirens or German Lorelei also resemble this dangerous aspect of an unchecked anima. Some Siberian tribes have a tale of such a destructive anima. In it, a lonely hunter is lured across the river by a beautiful woman emerging from a deep forest on the other side. She succeeds in gaining his attention, and he strips off his clothes to swim across and meet her. Reaching the other side, the woman flies away in the form of an owl, mocking him, and he dies attempting to swim back to his clothes. In this tale, the anima represents an unrealistic fantasy of love, warmth, and happiness that lures the man away from reality, to his peril. A negative anima can influence a man's personality in other subtle ways, such as producing effeminate remarks of a negative, pessimistic, poisonous, or waspish tone. Remarks of this type typically contain a twisting of the truth, and are subtly denigrating or destructive. Sanskrit legends depict a similar character, known as Vishakanya, or poison damsels, beautiful creatures who assassinate their lovers after their first night together. Conversely, if a man's relationship to his mother is excessively close or intimate, he can develop a mother complex. In this, the man becomes effeminate and naive of the ways of predatory women, who prey upon such unsuspecting men. Anima of this type can turn men into sentimentalists, or touchy old maids more sensitive than a fairy tale princess who can feel a pea under 30 mattresses. More subtle manifestations of negative animas include fairy tale princesses who ask their suitors a series of riddles, which, if they fail, will condemn them to death. In this form, the negative anima engages men in a destructive intellectual game. This can be seen in pseudo-intellectual dialogues that inhibit a man from getting in touch with life and making real decisions. Another way to put it is that a man becomes so introspective that he cannot live life and loses all spontaneity and outgoingness. The anima has a series of manifestations. One of the first anima manifestations a young man will experience takes the form of erotic fantasy. These can arise naturally, but are worsened by exposure to erotic material, burlesque, or modern internet media. The damaging psychological aspects of these anima fantasies cannot be underestimated. Obsessive viewers of such material can soon find their fantasies involve replacement of the female figure within the fantasy, leading to autogynephilia, gender dysphoria, and potentially homosexuality. Aspects of the anima, like those of the shadow, can be readily projected such that they appear as normal qualities of a particular woman, especially for the man inexperienced in relationships. In these projections, a man can create a fantasy figure that he projects onto a woman. These projections are just that, an unrealistic fantasy. Women of fairy-like demeanor, contemporarily known as the maniac pixie, especially attract such anima projections, because men can easily attribute anything to a creature so fascinatingly vague, and weave fantasies around her. Anima projection can appear in a sudden and passionate form as a love affair, which can greatly disturb marriage relationships. The secret aim of the unconscious in causing such an entanglement is to force a man to develop and bring his own being into maturity. This is done by integrating more of the unconscious personality into his real life. So far you might be thinking, wow, this anima thing sounds like bad news, and you'd be correct, if it is allowed to run completely unchecked by men ignorant to the concept of the anima. But the anima also performs some beneficial aspects. The anima is responsible in finding a compatible marriage partner. The anima also provides relation to the unconscious. When a man's masculine logical mind, is unable to discern facts in his unconscious. It is his feminine, emotional mind that helps him dig these facts out. Another beneficial role the anima plays is that of moral alignment. In this role, the anima functions to put a man's logical mind in tune with the correct inner values to prevent unconscious conflict, and open the way to more profound meaning in inner depths. In this way, the anima helps to tune the man's mind into the correct wavelength that enables the realization of the unconscious voice of meaning and destiny, be it the great man of the Naskapi Indian religion or other spiritual guide. There is a certain aspect of feeling and emotion contained within the greater meaning of one's life. If one is to make his way through the world using only his rational mind, he will often find himself at a loss of meaning, with a gap in his heart that cannot be filled. Ask yourself this. Can a man rationally explain why he enjoys a certain type of music, artwork, or hobby pursuit over any other? Indeed, it is quite difficult to explain, in rational terms, the attraction of such artistic pursuits. But it is these such pursuits that are determined by a man's anima. The positive function of the anima occurs when a man stops ignoring the feelings, moods, and expectations from his anima and translates them into some form of creative work. In this way, positive realization of the anima can be achieved, preventing the negative manifestations described earlier. This creative work could be poetry, painting, sculpture, musical composition, dancing, singing, writing, or other expressive pursuit. It could also mean other pursuits, such as those of compassion, like charitable causes. This takes a bit of experimentation, and one should not be discouraged just because the final product of one's creation does not match up to Mozart, Edgar Allan Poe, or the Russian ballet. The primary objective here is creative expression, and not the quality of the final product itself. Jung describes these products of artistic anima expression as a fantasy. After a fantasy has been fixed in some specific art form, it must be examined intellectually and ethically, with an eye to evaluating the feeling reaction elicited by the work. The fantasy should be regarded as absolutely real and not just whimsical. If this expression is practiced consistently over a long period, the process of individuation gradually becomes the single reality and can unfold in its true form. As I said earlier, I'm not going to delve deeply into the female counter aspect, the masculine animus, because I figure the number of women watching this video will be zero. The animus is the assertive, rational, and logical side of the female's unconscious. Similar to men, the animus requires some form of expression to provide fulfillment to the female species. Similar to men, the unchecked unconscious tendencies of the animus can be highly detrimental to women when they neglect their own matriarchal tendencies. The anima should be thought as a mediator between the ego and the unconscious self. Jung posited 4 stages of the development of the anima, which can be demonstrated in various forms of art and mythology. The first stage is a purely instinctive and biological embodiment, symbolized by the figure of the maternal Eve, and often involves purely sexual fantasy in immature men. The second can be seen in Faust's Helen, personifying a romantic and aesthetic level still characterized by sexual elements. The third can be represented by the Virgin Mary, a figure who raises love, also known as eros, to the heights of spiritual devotion, but while still providing some function of a matriarchal role. The fourth is symbolized by the Greek goddess of wisdom, Athena, or the wise portrait of the Mona Lisa, possessing a wisdom that transcends the biological, instinctual, and sexual aspects of the female figure. Throughout this video, I have explained the consequences of an unchecked anima. But how exactly does the anima become so powerful as to begin overpowering the conscious ego? Emma Jung described the root cause as a failure to fulfill spiritual functioning in the conscious mind. In men, this would be artistic and creative expression, and for women, intellectual activity or other complex task, but can also include creative expression. This failure to explore conscious expression of spiritual functioning causes a pressure to build, a form of psychic energy, which fills the unconscious and activates the anima or animus archetype. It is this frustrated and pent-up energy that possesses the anima and frees it of unconscious restraint, which can allow it to dominate the whole personality. Often the person suffering this anima or animus possession is quite unaware that this is occurring. For women, the introduction of birth control has freed a large reservoir of psychic energy, once resolved for that sacred, creative pursuit of child-rearing. The traditional female role of homemaking, arguably the most important task of humanity, has been relegated to a demeaning task in contemporary society. Increased involvement in the workplace has served as a poor substitute for this spiritually fulfilling role. Returning to the Anima features in the tale of King Arthur, his knights in the Holy Grail, usually as the fair damsel in the castle. It is in the medieval era that the concept of chivalry emerged, which is commonly confused with the treatment of flesh and blood women. This is not correct. Chivalry refers to the respect and restraint shown towards the inner feminine, the feminine form that allows man to relate to his feelings, emotions, and creative expressions. This figurative maiden must be treated with respect, and her input to the psyche taken seriously. Conversely, care must also be taken so that the negative aspects of the anima do not seduce the man in ways already described in that of the siren or femme fatale. In Chinese mythology, the positive anima is described by the goddess Kuan Yin, or the figure of the Lady of the Moon, who bestows the gift of poetry or music, and can even give the artist immortality. This latter gift of immortality is quite interesting. Is it not the very best poets, artists, and musicians whose name and works live on for eternity? And it is here that I must draw this explanation to a conclusion. The anima exists to relate our conscious to our unconscious. Like husband and wife, the anima and the unconscious walk hand in hand, guiding us on our path towards destiny. To channel our unrealized psychic energies into creative pursuits is a step towards self-understanding and realization, and the gateway to a world beyond our wildest dreams. Until next time.